My mom said it like it was good news.
Soft.
Careful. Like she didn't want to overwhelm me with how happy she was. Mia's engaged, she said. And I remember smiling automatically. Because that's what you do. You respond to the tone before you process the words. That's great, I said. And then she said his name.
Connor.
Just like that. No pause. No adjustment. Like it was a detail that didn't need explaining. And for a second, I genuinely thought I had heard her wrong. Because Connor wasn't just someone I knew. He wasn't just someone from the same circle. He was the man I had been with for 2 years. The one who had told me, 8 months earlier, that he wasn't ready for something serious. That he needed space. I didn't say anything straight away. I just sat there, holding the phone, trying to understand how those two realities could exist at the same time. Until my mom said something else. Something that made everything very clear. You'll be happy for her, won't you? And that was the moment I realized. This wasn't going to be treated like something that happened to me. It was something I was expected to step around. But to understand why I didn't step around it, you need to understand how quietly I had been holding things together for years. I moved away from home when I was 23. Not dramatically. Not because something had happened. Just because it made sense. I had finished my degree. Found a position at a firm I actually wanted to work for. And the opportunity was in another city. So I took it, packed my things, left quietly, the way I tend to do most things, without making it into a bigger moment than it needed to be. My parents supported it. Of course they did. They've always been supportive in that practical, steady way. They want good things for me. They just don't always notice what those things cost, or how they land. Being away suited me, not because I needed distance, just because I think better when I have space, when I'm not constantly adjusting to other people's expectations, or moods, or the subtle shifts that happen in a family without anyone naming them. From the outside, we've always looked close, and we are, in the way families are when nothing obvious is broken. We speak regularly, visit on holidays, show up when it matters. There's warmth there, real warmth, but there's also a pattern. Something I didn't fully understand until much later. My sister Mia has always been magnetic, not intentionally. She doesn't try to be the center of things. She just becomes it. People are drawn to her energy, her way of moving through the world, like things will work out in her favor. And often they do. Growing up, it never felt competitive. Not directly. We weren't compared. Not out loud. But there was always a difference in how things settled. If Mia wanted something, it became a conversation. A possibility. Something worth making space for. If I wanted something, I usually found a way to make it work without asking. Not resentfully, just independently. I learned early that it was easier to carry things myself, to adjust quietly, to not make my needs into something that disrupted the flow of everything else. And that became normal. So normal, I didn't question it. I built a life that reflected that. Careful, structured, thought through. My work suited me. Architecture demands patience, precision, the ability to sit with something until it makes sense, to see the whole structure before anyone else does. And I was good at that, in my work and in my life. When I met Connor, it didn't feel dramatic. There was no immediate spark, no moment that felt like something had shifted. It was slower than that, more grounded. We met through mutual friends. At a dinner that wasn't meant to be anything important, just people gathering, talking, moving through the evening without expectation. He was easy to be around, not loud, not trying to impress anyone, just present. We started seeing each other gradually. Coffee at first, then dinners, then weekends that extended without either of us commenting on it. And before I realized it, it had become something steady. Something real. 2 years doesn't feel long when you're inside it. It just feels continuous, like something that fits into your life without forcing anything out of place. He met my parents, came to family dinners, not often, but enough. He knew Mia. Of course he did. She was part of everything, not directly involved, just there in the background of my life, the way she always had been. There was nothing about it that felt complicated, nothing that suggested anything needed to be watched or questioned. If anything, it felt settled, predictable in a way that made me feel secure. And then, slowly, something changed. Not suddenly, not in a way I could point to, just small shifts. He became less available, less certain. Conversations that used to feel easy started to feel slightly managed, like he was choosing his words more carefully, creating space where there hadn't been space before. I noticed it. Of course I did. But I didn't push. Because I've never been someone who forces clarity out of something that isn't ready to give it. I wait. I observe. I let things reveal themselves. Until they did. He ended it one evening. Quietly. No argument. No raised voices. Just a conversation that had already been decided before I was part of it. I'm not ready for something serious, he said. I need space. That word again. Space. I remember sitting there, listening, trying to match what he was saying to what we had been, and not quite being able to, because it didn't feel unfinished. It didn't feel unstable. It just ended, and I accepted it. Not easily, not without pain, but without resistance. Because if someone tells you they don't want to be in something anymore, there isn't anything to negotiate. So I let it go, quietly, the way I let most things go. I didn't question the timeline, didn't look for reasons that weren't offered. I trusted what I had been told, because there was no reason not to. And for 8 months, I built my life around that version of events. Something that had ended, cleanly, respectfully, without overlap, without complication, until that phone call. And the moment his name was placed next to my sister's, and everything I thought I understood stopped making sense. I didn't respond to my mum straight away. Not after she said his name. Not after she said they were engaged. I just sat there, holding the phone, letting the silence stretch longer than it should have. Because I needed a second to understand what I was hearing. Not emotionally, just logically. How long? I asked. It came out quieter than I expected. Not sharp, not accusing, just precise. There was a small pause on the other end. Not long, but enough. Oh, not long, she said. Things just developed. Developed. That word landed softly, but it didn't sit right. Because development takes time, movement, something building. And I knew exactly how long it had been since Connor ended things with me. 8 months. I had counted them without meaning to, measured them in seasons, in projects, in small moments where I noticed he was no longer part of my life. And now suddenly he was back, just in a different place, with a different person. You'll come to the engagement dinner, won't you? My mum added. Still warm, still assuming, like this was the natural next step. I need to think, I said. And even that felt like more than I wanted to offer. She paused again. Then, try to be happy for her, she said. Not unkindly, just firmly, like she was guiding me toward the correct response. We ended the call shortly after that. Nothing resolved, nothing clarified, just an expectation placed in the space between us. I didn't cry, not then. I didn't react in any visible way. I just sat there, looking at the wall in front of me, and let the timeline start to form properly. 8 months. That was what I had been told. That was the space between my relationship ending and theirs beginning. But something about that didn't hold. Not cleanly. Not when I thought about the way he had changed toward the end. The distance. The carefulness. The way conversations had started to feel like they were being managed. I stood up slowly, walked to my kitchen, poured a glass of water, I didn't drink. Because my mind had already moved somewhere else. Not to them. Not yet. To the last few months of my relationship. Replaying them. Not emotionally. Structurally. Like I would approach a design that didn't quite work. Looking for where it started to shift. And once I started looking, I saw it. Not one moment. A pattern. Small things that didn't mean much at the time, but meant something now. Times he canceled. Said he was busy. Unavailable in ways that didn't match what I knew about him. And then something else. Something quieter. The way he mentioned Mia. Not often. Not directly. Just in passing. A conversation they had at a family dinner. Something she had said. Something she had recommended. At the time, it hadn't stood out. Why would it? She was my sister. She was part of my life. Of course, he knew her. Of course they spoke. There was nothing unusual in that. Until there was. I picked up my phone. Scrolled through old messages. Not searching for anything specific. Just looking. Letting things surface on their own. And they did. A message from him. From months before the breakup. Ran into your sister today. I stared at it for a second, because I didn't remember asking about that. Didn't remember him telling me where or why. Just that it had happened. And I hadn't questioned it. Why would I have? I kept scrolling. Another message. She mentioned something about work. She's doing really well. Again, casual. Again, nothing that stood out at the time. But now it did. Because it was consistent. A thread. Something that existed quietly alongside my relationship. Something I hadn't been paying attention to. I sat down slowly, phone still in my hand, and let the pieces start to align. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Enough to understand that what I had believed, that things ended cleanly. That there was space between us, and whatever came next, wasn't something I could rely on anymore. I didn't call Mia. I didn't message Connor. Because I didn't need their version of it yet. I needed to understand what I already had. So I started asking small questions. Carefully. Not directly. Just in conversation. A friend who had been at a dinner near the end of my relationship. Do you remember who was there? She listed people. Then, Mia came by later, didn't she? Later. I didn't remember that. Or maybe I hadn't registered it properly. Because it hadn't seemed important. At the time. Another conversation. Another small detail. A gathering I hadn't gone to. That was the night Connor and Mia really got talking, someone said. Lightly. Without meaning anything by it. And that was how it happened. Not one revelation. Just accumulation. Piece by piece. Until the shape of it became impossible to ignore. They had known each other. More than casually. Before my relationship ended. Not publicly. Not obviously. But enough. Enough that when things ended with me, there was already something in place for him to step into. And the part that settled hardest wasn't even that. It was this. I had been in that relationship. Fully. Present. Believing it was what it was. While something else had already started forming alongside it. Quietly. Out of view. I put my phone down. Sat back. And let that sit properly. Because this wasn't just about being replaced. It was about understanding that I had been part of something that wasn't what I thought it was. And that realization changes everything. Because once you see the overlap, you can't pretend it was ever clean. And the question wasn't just what they had done. It was why everyone else seemed so willing to move forward like none of it needed to be said out loud. I didn't confront them right away. Not Mia. Not Connor. Not even my parents again. Because I wasn't trying to catch anyone out. I was trying to understand the full shape of it. And that takes time. Quiet time. The kind where you sit with something until it stops shifting. Until it settles into something solid enough to stand on. I kept going over the timeline. Not emotionally. Structurally. The end of my relationship. The way he had pulled back. The way things had already started to feel partial, like I was still fully there. And he wasn't. And then I placed Mia into that space. Not after, during. And suddenly everything made sense in a way I didn't want it to. Not because it was dramatic, because it was quiet, consistent, deliberate in a way that didn't need to be obvious to be real. I went back through my messages again, this time slower, looking for what I hadn't seen before. And I found it. Not one moment, a pattern, small mentions of her. Things he said that felt harmless at the time, but now felt placed. I ran into your sister again today. Again. That word stayed with me, because again implies something ongoing, something repeated, not accidental, not occasional. I scrolled further. Photos from that period, group settings, events, people overlapping. And there it was, a picture I hadn't thought about in months, taken at someone else's birthday. Connor in the background, Mia just slightly closer to him than she should have been. Not obvious, not inappropriate, just closer. The kind of thing you don't question when you trust the people involved. And that was the part that stayed with me. Not what they did, but what I hadn't questioned, because I had trusted both of them completely. I set my phone down, stood up, walked to the window, and just stood there, because there's a moment when something becomes clear. And it doesn't feel loud. It feels quiet, like something inside you just settles into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't something that developed after. It was something that had been happening while I was still in it. And the part that hurt wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the fact that no one had told me. Not him, not her. And now, not even my parents were willing to say it out loud. They had taken the version that was easiest to live with. It happened after. It's complicated. Just be happy for her. And placed it over everything else. Like that made it acceptable. Like that made it something I could step around. I sat back down, picked up my phone, and looked at Connor's name. Still there. Still saved. I hadn't deleted it. Not out of attachment. Just because I hadn't needed to. Until now. I didn't call him. Because I already knew what he would say. Something measured. Something careful. Something designed to reduce what had actually happened into something that sounded reasonable. And I wasn't interested in that version. Not anymore. Instead, I called my mom again. Not to argue. Just to place something clearly. She answered quickly, like she had been expecting it. Have you spoken to Mia? She asked. First question. Not how I was. Not how I felt. Just whether I had stepped into the version of things they were trying to maintain. No, I said. And I'm not going to. There was a pause. Then, you need to talk this through, she said. Soft. Controlled. We all want this to be okay. That phrase. This to be okay. Like it already was. Like the only missing piece was my agreement. I know when it started, I said. Still calm. Still even. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you mean? She asked. Careful now. Because something had shifted. They were in contact while I was still with him, I said. Not a question. Not an accusation. Just placing it. She didn't respond immediately. And that silence told me more than anything she could have said. You don't know that, she said finally. But it didn't sound certain. It sounded protective. I do, I said. And I let that sit. Because this wasn't something I needed to prove to her. I already knew. I think you're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. And there it was. The core of it. Not that something wrong had happened. That I was making it difficult by refusing to move past it. That my clarity was the problem. Not what had been done. I leaned back in my chair, breathing steady. Because this was the moment everything became completely clear. Not just what Connor had done. Not just what Mia had allowed. But what my family needed from me. They didn't need me to understand. They needed me to absorb it. To make it easier. To smooth it into something that didn't disrupt anything. and I wasn't going to do that. Not this time. Would you go? I asked her, quietly, not pushing, just placing the question where it belonged. If it was me, she didn't answer, not straight away. And that was enough, because the answer existed. She just didn't want to say it, and I didn't need her to. I already had everything I needed, because once you see the truth clearly, the decision that comes after it isn't complicated. It's just difficult. Would you show up and smile for something that was built on a version of your life that wasn't true, or would you finally choose yourself? I didn't make the decision immediately. Not that night, not even the next day, because I didn't want it to come from the wrong place. Not from hurt, not from reaction, but from something steadier than that. Something I could stand on later without questioning it. So I gave myself time, not to soften it, just to understand it fully. I went to work, sat at my desk, opened drawings I had been working on before all of this, and tried to move through something structured, something that made sense. But even there, my mind kept returning to the same point, not what they had done, but what I was being asked to do. Attend, smile, stand in a room and act like none of it needed to be acknowledged. And that part didn't sit. Not because it was dramatic, because it was precise. It required me to participate in something that wasn't true. And I've never been good at that. Not when I understand something clearly. A few days later, my mom called again. This time more direct. We need to talk about the wedding, she said. Of course we did. That was always where this was going. I'm not coming, I said. No build-up. No explanation yet. Just the decision. There was a silence on the line. Sharp this time. Not stretched. Immediate. You can't mean that, she said. And I noticed it. Not why. Not tell me more. Just rejection. I do, I said. Still calm. Still even. Another pause. Then, this will hurt your sister, she said. There it was again. Placement. The impact flowing in one direction. Toward Mia. Not me. It already has, I replied. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push it. I just let the truth sit where it belonged. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, she said. We've all agreed to move forward. We've all agreed. That phrase settled quietly. Because I hadn't agreed to anything. I had just not been consulted. That's the problem, I said. You've already decided what this is supposed to be. And I'm being asked to fit into it. She exhaled. Long. Controlled. This is your family, she said. As if that ended the conversation. As if that meant something automatic. It used to. That kind of sentence used to stop me. Make me adjust. Reconsider. Find a way to meet everyone halfway. But not this time. I know, I said. And I'm choosing how I show up in it. That was new. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Because she hadn't heard that from me before. Not clearly. Not without something softening it. You'll regret this, she said. Quiet now. Not sharp. Just certain. And I thought about that. Not defensively. Just honestly. Because regret matters. It's something you have to live with. So I let myself sit with the question. Would I regret not going? Or would I regret standing there pretending it didn't matter? I don't think I will, I said. And I meant it. The conversation didn't escalate. It didn't resolve. It just ended. Because we had reached the point where neither of us was going to shift. And that was okay. That was the first time I let that be okay. That evening, I sat at my table. A blank sheet of paper in front of me. Not my laptop. Not a message. Paper. Because I didn't want this to feel quick. Or reactive. I wanted it to feel deliberate. I started writing. Slowly. Not trying to make it perfect. Just true. I wrote about the timeline. Not accusing. Just placing it clearly. I wrote about what it felt like to hear his name next to hers. After everything I had been told. I wrote about the expectation, to attend, to smile, to make something comfortable that wasn't. And then I wrote the part that mattered most. What I needed now. Not an apology shaped to make things easier. Not a version of events that avoided what had happened. Just honesty. And space to not participate in something I didn't believe in. I didn't reread it immediately. I left it on the table, walked away, made tea, came back, and read it once. Not to edit, just to check if it still felt true. It did. I folded it carefully, put it in an envelope, wrote my parents' address on the front, and for a moment, I just held it, because this wasn't about the wedding. Not really. It was about stepping out of a role I had been in for years. The one who absorbed things, smoothed them out, made them easier for everyone else. And once you step out of that, you don't go back. I posted it the next morning, not with hesitation, just with clarity. And as it dropped into the box, I knew something had already changed. Not in them, not yet, but in me. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission to decide what was acceptable in my own life. I didn't hear from them straight away. Not that day, not the next. And I expected that. Because a letter like that doesn't sit lightly. It doesn't get answered quickly. It has to be read, then reread, then sat with. And I knew my parents well enough to understand that silence, for them, wasn't absence. It was processing. Or avoidance. Sometimes both. I went back to work properly that week. Not distracted. Not distant. Just focused in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. Because there was nothing unresolved in me anymore. The decision had been made. Placed. And I wasn't waiting for anyone to approve it. That changed how everything felt. Lighter. Not because the situation was easy, but because I wasn't carrying it the same way. 3 days later, my mom called. I saw her name on my phone. Let it ring once. Twice. Then answered. "Hi," she said. Her voice was different. Not as certain. Not as directed. Just quieter. "Hi." There was a pause. Longer than usual. "I got your letter," she said. "I know." Another pause. And I could hear it. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something closer to being unsettled. "We didn't realize you felt like that," she said. And for a second, I almost responded the way I used to. Softening it. Making it easier. But I didn't. "I know you didn't," I said. And I let that sit. Because that was the point. Not that they knew. That they hadn't asked. That they hadn't looked closely enough to see what was already there. "You've always been understanding," she added. Careful now. Like she was trying to find her way through something unfamiliar. Understanding. That word stayed there between us. Because it had always been used as something positive. Something I was praised for. But now it felt different. Like something I had been placed into, without choosing it. "I won't be in this situation," I said. Still calm. Still steady. There was a silence after that. But it wasn't sharp. It wasn't defensive. It was real. The kind of silence that happens when something lands exactly where it needs to. "I think your dad wants to talk to you," she said after a moment. And that surprised me. Not because he wouldn't, but because he usually didn't step in first. I waited, listened as the phone shifted. Then his voice came through, quieter than hers. "All right," he said. Same word he always used, but it didn't carry the same weight this time. "I'm okay," I said. A pause. Then, "You're not wrong," he said. And that was it. No long explanation. No justification. Just that. And something in me settled immediately. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time someone had named it without trying to reshape it. "I'm not going to the wedding," I said. Not as a reminder, just to place it clearly. "I know," he replied. No argument. No push. Just acceptance. Another pause. Then, We should have handled it better, he added. And I could hear it. Not polished, not carefully worded, just honest. That mattered more than anything else they could have said. We didn't stay on the phone long after that. There wasn't a need to, because the important part had already happened. Something had shifted. Not completely, but enough. The wedding came a few weeks later. I didn't go. I didn't check photos. Didn't ask how it went. I let it exist without me. And that felt right. Not easy, but right. Because I wasn't avoiding it. I was choosing not to participate in something that didn't sit within my boundaries. And there's a difference between those two things. My mom called the day after. Not to update me. Not to explain anything. Just to talk. Normal things. Work. Weather. Small details. And I understood what she was doing. Trying to find a way forward. Without forcing it. Without pretending nothing had happened. And I met her there. Not by smoothing it out. Just by being present in a way that didn't undo what I had already said. Mia didn't call. Not then. Not immediately after. And I didn't expect her to. Because what I had said required something from her too. Not an apology. Something deeper than that. And that takes time. Weeks passed. Then months. Life moved. The way it always does. Work. Projects. Evenings that filled themselves with things that belonged to me. And slowly the intensity of it all shifted into something quieter. Not gone. Just integrated. Then one evening I got a message. From Mia. Short. Simple. Can we talk? I looked at it for a long time before responding. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I wanted to understand what I needed from that conversation. Not what she needed. What I did. I replied. Yes. We spoke the next day. And she didn't apologize. Not directly. But she said something else. Something that mattered more. I didn't think about it from your side properly, she said. And that was the first real thing she had offered. Not perfect. Not complete. But real. And sometimes that's where things actually begin. Not in fixing what happened, but in finally seeing it clearly. From both sides. And once that happens, something changes that can't be undone. Even if everything else takes time to catch up to it. The first time I saw them together after everything was by accident. Not planned. Not arranged. Just one of those moments that happens when your life and someone else's still overlap in quiet ways. I was back in my parents' city for work. A meeting that ran longer than expected. And I stopped at a cafe near the station before heading back. It wasn't somewhere I chose intentionally. Just convenient. And when I walked in, I saw them before they saw me. Connor and Mia, sitting by the window, talking about something ordinary. Coffee between them. Her hand resting near his. Not dramatic. Not uncomfortable. Just settled. And that was the part that surprised me. Not that they were together. I already knew that. But how normal it looked. How easily it existed. Like it had always been there. I stood there for a second. Not frozen. Not upset. Just observing. Because a year earlier, that moment would have felt like something being taken from me. Now, it felt like something I had stepped away from. I didn't go over. I didn't interrupt. There was nothing to say. Nothing to resolve. I ordered my coffee, sat on the other side of the room, and let them exist without me. And for the first time, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like distance. Chosen. Clean. Complete. Mia saw me when I stood up to leave. Our eyes met for a second. Not long. Just enough. She gave a small nod. I returned it. And that was all. No tension. No performance. Just acknowledgement. Outside, the air felt different. Cooler than I expected. I stood there for a moment, holding my cup, and realized something quietly. I wasn't carrying it anymore. Not the way I had been. Not the confusion. Not the need to understand every part of it. Just the clarity of what it had been. And what I had chosen after it. That evening, my mom called. Not about them. Not about anything specific. Just to check in. And the conversation felt different again. Not careful. Not controlled. Just normal in a way that didn't require me to adjust anything. "How was your trip?" she asked. "Good," I said. And it was. Because nothing about it had pulled me back into something I had already stepped out of. We spoke for a while. Small things. Everyday things. And before we ended the call, she said, "I'm glad you told us the way you did. Simple. Not elaborate. But it mattered." Because that was something she wouldn't have said a year earlier. Not without softening it. Not without trying to reshape it into something easier. "I'm glad I did too," I said. And I meant that. Because that letter hadn't just been about the wedding. It had been about something much bigger. What I was willing to stand inside. And what I wasn't. Mia and I spoke occasionally after that. Not often. Not like before. But honestly. Without pretending things were unchanged. And that worked. Better than what we had before. Because nothing important was sitting unspoken between us anymore. My life moved forward. Not dramatically. Just steadily. Work. Projects. Evenings that felt like mine. People who showed up in ways that didn't require me to interpret anything. And that became enough. More than enough. Sometimes I think back to the moment my mom said his name on the phone. How everything shifted in that single second. And how easily I could have done what they expected. Shown up. Smiled. Stood in that room and made it easier for everyone else. But I didn't. And that decision changed something fundamental. Not in them first. In me. Because once you stop absorbing things that don't belong to you, you see everything differently. You move differently. You choose differently. And that stays. If something asks you to stand inside a version of your life that isn't true, pay attention to that. Because the moment you step out of it is usually the moment everything actually begins to change. If you've ever had to choose yourself in a situation where it would have been easier not to, you'll understand exactly what that feels like. And if stories like this resonate with you, you can subscribe for more. There's another one waiting for you right here.